proceed. Counsel, appearances, please. Sorry, you repeat that, Your Honor. Counsel, your appearances, please.
J.D. Steves, counsel for the plaintiff.
And Laura Moot.
And for the defense?
Defense, Shane Munson, Your Honor.
And Taylor Fox for the defense.
Very well. Both sides ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any housekeeping matters?
Yes, Your Honor. The only housekeeping matter we have is as far as we go with admitting as an expert witness. How would you prefer we do that? Would you rather we just kind of go through their credentials and then just go forward as if they are and then take objections as they come, or would you ask us to actually make a motion?
Well, that's substantive, not housekeeping. I'm going to let you play that as you see fit.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor.
The plaintiff has some housekeeping questions.
Go ahead, counsel.
Would you prefer that we stand to make objections?
That's up to you. I can hear either way.
Okay.
Can you hear me either way? Yes.
Would you prefer that we address you or a fictional jury?
Well, that's for you to decide. I'm not
Okay.
bad facts, I think. So, play that role as you see fit, but I understand the fiction of there being a non-existent jury.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any other housekeeping matters?
Nothing from the defense, Your Honor.
Plaintiff, you may proceed.
May it please the court. Counsel. 5 red flags. That's how many red flags were ignored before the Fortuna sunk. My name is Lauren Maloof. This is my partner, Jaden Steves, and we are here today representing Evan Starkey, a teacher from California whose life changed aboard the Fortuna. When the Fortuna sunk, lives were lost, and those who lived watched others be swept away. The survivors, like Evan, might not have died, but what their life was like before the cruise was lost. Their lives were forever changed, all because 5 red flags were ignored. The evidence will show that corners were cut in the making of the ship, leading to rusting in the ship's hull. On the final voyage, a small rupture in the ship's hull expanded into a 208-foot tear, causing catastrophic hull failure, sinking the ship at an alarming rate. Today's case can be thought of in terms of red flags. When one ignores a red flag, one has ignored steps or actions that they should have taken. We are here today to determine if Cruzy ignored red flags which foreshadowed the disaster to come. The evidence will show that Cruzy ignored not 1, but 5 red flags. Red flag number 1. The facts will show the ship was bought at a bankruptcy sale. Red flag number 2. You'll hear from a highly skilled and qualified engineer who was Cruzy's chief engineer at the time of the sinking, that she issued a warning about unexplainable linking. Red flag number 3. The facts will show that the leaking continually increased, unexplained for 19 months. Red flag number 4. The facts will show that questionable pumps were relied upon. And the final and 5th red flag, that the chief engineer issued a final warning that the ship must be inspected prior to the final voyage. The evidence will show that Cruzy had a duty to heed these red flags. And the evidence will show that by ignoring these red flags, Cruzy's inaction led to a preventable and foreseeable tragedy, which an ordinary dry dock inspection could have prevented. The evidence will show, had Cruzy heeded these red flags by inspecting the Fortuna, they could have prevented harms from befalling their passengers. Passengers like Evan Starkey. He will be taking the stand today and telling his story of being aboard the Fortuna and how that changed his life. And this is where we need you. The standard you will use to decide today's case is preponderance of the evidence. And what this means is that if you believe there is a greater than 50% chance, even a 51% chance that Cruzy breached a duty by ignoring these red flags, causing harm to Evan Starkey, you must find for Evan Starkey. As you will see today, 5 red flags, 5 opportunities to do something, 5 times nothing was done. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we ask that you will find for Evan Starkey that justice may be done and that wrongs may be amended. Thank you.
Comments?
May it please the court. Ordinary, not extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we would like to thank you for being here today and taking on this tremendous responsibility. Again, my name is Taylor Fox with co-counsel Shane Mutton, and together we represent the defendant, Jamie. In the early morning hours of August 4th, a terrible tragedy occurred. In the midst of a storm, the Fortuna, a ship owned and operated by Cruzy, experienced a catastrophic and unprecedented hull failure and was lost at sea. Many perished that day, and while some, including Evan, were lucky enough to escape with their lives, we would like to recognize that we sympathize with the families of these victims, and our hearts go out to them. And it is only natural following tragic events such as these that victims will begin to raise questions and look for somebody to blame. The question you have to answer here today is who is to blame for the Fortuna's sinking? This is Jamie Young, the dedicated and hardworking owner and CEO of the cruise line company Cruzy. The plaintiff hopes to show that Jamie is that person to blame. As you've heard in their opening remarks, they are attempting to paint Jamie out as a greedy business owner who put profits over people. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this could not be further from the truth. Over the course of this trial, the facts will show Jamie followed every industry standard to ensure the safety of her passengers. The facts will show Jamie had no reason to believe the Fortuna was in any imminent danger. The facts will show Jamie had no reason to believe the leaking was any indicator of an unprecedented structural defect. The facts will also show that the real cause of the disaster was due to low-grade steel used in the Fortuna's construction. And the facts will show that even if the Fortuna had been inspected, there is no guarantee this larger issue would have been discovered. Throughout this hearing, you will no doubt hear that Jamie owed a duty to Evan Starkey. But what exactly was that duty? We ask you to remember one simple phrase: ordinary, not extraordinary. Now, this is important, you see, because the plaintiff would have you believe that Jamie owed the defendant, the plaintiff, an extraordinary level of care. And they will attempt to show that Jamie should have known about structural defects that had eluded everyone else, even her own engineers, until after the Fortuna sunk.
The facts will show the plaintiff's case against Jamie is based entirely upon hindsight. Of course, everything is clear in hindsight. Hindsight is 20/20. In reality, the duty Jamie owed Evan is that of ordinary care. Ordinary care means to act as a reasonable person would under the circumstances. And the facts will show Jamie did exactly that. That Jamie conducted herself as any of us would, based on the information she had received. Because, ladies and gentlemen, you can only act based on what you know. And the evidence today will show that Jamie had no possible way of knowing what truly plagued the Fortuna. That the Fortuna was constructed out of cheap steel. We know that now, of course, but it's too late. I'm sure all of us wish we could go back in time and prevent the disaster with what we learned after the event. But we can't. And while Jamie may be a convenient target, are we really to say Jamie is to blame? Remember, ordinary, not extraordinary. Are we to say it is Jamie who is to blame and not the ship manufacturers when the bottom of the ship experienced an unprecedented and catastrophic collapse of the hull? All because of leaks. Ladies and gentlemen, as we proceed, you will find the plaintiff's case against Jamie is not really about leaks or her failure to give them reasonable attention, but rather this is a case trying to blame Jamie for an issue that had eluded everyone else. You tell me, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, can a reasonable person predict the future? Does that sound like ordinary care? Thank you.
I move to call Evan Starkey to the stand.
Mr. Starkey, could you please state and spell your first and last name?
Evan Starkey, E-V-A-N, S-T-A-R-K-E-Y.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you for being with us here today. I want to talk a little bit about your background, Evan. Could you tell the jury where you're from?
I'm from San Diego.
And what did you do?
I'm a fifth grade school teacher.
And how would you describe your life before the cruise?
My life was really good. I loved my job. Love to be able to go each day, teach students, and talk about things I like and see the joy for them learning. Afterwards, I'd come home. I'd be able to, grade papers, go for walks, right? Just spend time to relax, and I really liked it.
All right, and let's talk a little bit about your experience on the Fortuna. Why did you go on this cruise?
I had a couple vacation days, and I saw an opportunity to be able to buy a ticket for a discount price, and thought it was a great opportunity to be able to go relax and just enjoy.
And what did you expect going on the cruise?
I expected to be able to enjoy movies, be able to enjoy the ocean air, kind of as they're advertised. I certainly didn't expect a ship to not be in good repair or for that to have happened.
All right, and let's talk a little bit about your experience on the Fortuna. How long were you on the Fortuna?
Just a single day.
Can you tell us about your evening on the Fortuna?
Yeah, in the evening, I gone swimming, and afterwards, I decided to go to the bar. I ended up meeting a couple people, and one of them, her name was Jane. We had a really great time. She liked the same books as I did. We had the same humor, and it was a great night. At that time, the boat had started to rock quite drastically, and since it was getting late, she was a little worried and wanted to go to her room and invited me to come with her. So I did. Upon riding to the room, the rocking had gotten worse, and scared, she'd asked if I could stay the night, and I said yes, so long as I could sleep on the couch and there'd be no worries, and she was okay with that, so we went to bed.
And why did you agree to spend the night in her room?
Yeah, just because she seemed really scared, and she's a really nice person. I wanted to help her.
And what happened after that?
That night, really late, we woke up to the sound of an alarm. At that time, I looked out the window, and she happened to live at the lowest level for passengers for her room, and we could see the water was above her window. Stressed and a little confused, grabbed her hand, and we rushed outside.
What happened after you rushed out of the room?
There was some debris kind of already strewn on the floor. Water was coming in, and you could see a lot of people trying to rush up the stairs, but I don't know what was happening there. They weren't able to get up, and they were all congregating in that spot.
And what happened once people started to congregate?
I started to hear a noise of water rushing through, and the water, I could see it eventually. It came over the stairs and started colliding with people, knocking them all over the place. And you can hear their screams as they were trying to figure out what to do. And luckily, I was next to the wall. I was able to grab onto a handrail. And in doing so, when I got hit by the wave, I was still holding Jane's hand. She got swept away as well. And I watched them, most of the people, disappear down the hallway.
Did you ever see those people again?
Now they're gone.
And what happened after you were grabbing on the handrail?
The water eventually, it pushed me down further, and I tumbled down the stairs, and it slowed down. I was able to work my way back up the stairs, and I'd get to a couple more floors until I'd see more people kind of congregating on the stairs. They're trying to make their way up too, and I was able to grab onto a rail and see that probably what happened last time would happen again. It would. There'd be more screams, more water would flow. People be dragged into the ship, and I'd be able to hold on and kind of stay away from where the water was coming, and so I could work my way up the stairs again. And I kept doing that until I got to the top of the ship and was able to get out right when the full ship was sinking. It sank pretty quickly then, and I was stuck in the water.
What happened after you were stuck in the water?
Well, the Coast Guard came eventually. I don't know how long we were in the water. It was really cold. It was a long time then. And they were to pick me up, and ended up getting sent to the hospital. There at the hospital, they said that I was fine because I didn't have any broken bones. I was pretty beat up, but there wasn't anything that was drastic enough to keep me in that night, so they sent me home.
Let's talk a little bit more about your experience after getting home. How has your life changed?
Life's not what it used to be, right? I really have a lot of trouble sleeping. Each night I go to bed and I see either Jane disappearing or other people, children, being swept away, and I wake up in cold sweats, or I'm not able to grab onto the bar and I get swept away with them. I'm not able to keep sleeping.
How would you describe your overall emotional and physical well-being?
Bad. I can't concentrate now. It always feels as if there's something there that something bad's going to happen again, or that just a normal day will become a disaster like it did. And I can't. I don't do well at work. And I'm not able to be the same teacher I used to be. I'm not able to give that same amount to the students.
Well, thank you for being with us here today. No further questions, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Good evening, Evan. I want to start by recognizing that this is clearly a horrible situation, and I know it's not any easier for you having to be here in court and having to relive the event, so we sympathize with you. But I would like to ask you a couple quick questions, if that's okay. I'd like to begin by asking you a couple questions about your initial experience on the boat, and then a few questions about how your life has been once you made it back ashore. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. Evan, once you boarded the Fortuna, the first thing you did was an evacuation procedure and safety drill. Is that correct?
Yeah, they kind of just spoke.
Okay. So Cruzy must have cared about your safety to some extent.
Yeah, to some extent.
Okay. And after this, I know you were there for only a day. It sounds like you were actually able to enjoy yourself for that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, before it was a really good time. I was able to watch a movie. I mean, normal cruise things.
Watch a movie in the super nice theater.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great theater. It was normal. Right?
A good dinner. It sounds like you ate some surf and turf.
Yeah,
Took a couple laps in their Olympic-sized pool. So is it safe to say that Cruzy spared no expense when it came to entertaining you?
yeah. My entertainment needs, if not my safety needs,
Okay.
were met.
And Evan, how about the events leading up to the disaster? Did you ever feel like the ship or its crew had ever cut corners, or your life was ever in jeopardy?
I mean, I was only there for a day. I didn't really see much.
I understand. And just a couple more quick questions. Once you made it back on shore, Evan, did you go to the hospital?
Yeah, they sent me to the hospital afterwards, after the Coast Guard to pick me up.
And when you went to the hospital, did they keep you overnight, or did they send you home?
No, because my injuries weren't bad. They said I was fine to go home. I was pretty beaten up, but
Your
it
inju-
wasn't anything, that needed me to stay overnight.
Okay. Your injuries weren't bad, and they told you that you were fine?
Yeah, they told me I was fine.
Okay. And is it true you are not currently seeing a therapist?
Yeah, I stopped going to a therapist. I didn't want to keep reliving.
And in fact, you went right back to work. Is that also accurate?
No, I used my vacation days to stay, but after I ran out, I didn't want to be fired. I went back.
I see. So did you miss any work days?
No, because I used my vacation days.
Okay. Thank you. Wish you well, Evan. No further questions.
Andrew, you're right.
Evan, can you tell the jury why you stopped seeing a therapist?
Yeah, I think I went 4 times. Each time we go over the event again and again, and I don't want to keep reliving that. It hurt too much, and I didn't think that would help me in any way to just keep suffering.
No further questions, Your Honor.
We call Taylor Andrews to the stand.
You're under oath. Please state and spell your first and last name.
Taylor Andrews, TaylorAndrews.
Miss Andrews, let's begin by discussing your professional background and qualifications. Permission to approach the witness?
Sir. Counsel, you don't have to ask him that.
Showing opposing counsel. What is that?
This is my resume.
How do you know?
I wrote it.
Is it a faithful and accurate copy?
Yeah, it is.
Could you tell the jury more about the details of your resume?
Sure. So I started off in the United States Navy. I was a damage controlman to begin. I was responsible for vessel damage control, stability, firefighting, plumbing, anything of that sort. I just mostly was instructed to help keep the ships afloat. I then was a hull maintenance technician. I continued that for several years, and then I was honorably discharged. I then went to school. I got a bachelor's degree in marine engineering. following that, I worked for several cruise lines. I have over 20 years of experience with cruise ships, cruise lines, with their structural safety. It's hard to say everything that I've done. I think it'd be shorter to say the things that I haven't done when it comes to this work. So most recently, though, I was the chief engineer for Cruzy.
Thank you. I move to admit Exhibit B into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
You proceed.
I move to tender Taylor Andrews as an expert in nautical engineering and cruise ships.
You're asking me to do something. What exactly do you want me to do?
To tender her as an expert so that she can give her opinion to the court on matters related to nautical engineering.
And what opinion are you
That was going to come further in the questioning. If you'd prefer, I could not make a...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
If you'd prefer, we could refrain from a formal motion and instead simply ask her opinion later on.
Defense counsel,
I think that works for us, Your Honor.
proceed on that basis.
Excellent. Let's move on to your work as the chief engineer of the Fortuna.
Sure.
Could you tell us about your experience beginning in 2014?
Yeah, before that it was great. 2014 was the first time I started having concerns with Cruzy and particularly the Fortuna, which is the ship in question. So I started noticing leaking, and some leaking is normal, you know, of any ship, but especially of cruise ships of this size. That's not uncommon, but there was an uptick, and that was a little bit concerning. And it's concerning because if you don't know where the leaking is coming from, it's a symptom of a larger issue. So I went ahead and I emailed Mr. Young, the CEO of Cruzy, my boss, and let him know about this issue.
Did he respond?
He did. I will say I said that there was no immediate or obvious danger, and that for now, like with the amount of leaking, this was in January of 2014, I will say, January 1st. So I said that there was no obvious or immediate danger with the leaking, that those pumps would be able to handle that for now. It's something we need to keep our eye on. And he responded by saying that Cruzy was going through financial hardships, and he wanted to save up more money rather than do a dry dock inspection, which is what I had strongly advised that we do. So we continued.
What happened after that?
Well, after that, there began to be more unexplained leaking, and this was concerning. I emailed the CEO, Mr. Young. I emailed him weekly, telling him about the increase in leaking. And again, like I said, this is a big, complicated machine. This isn't something you mess around with. You can't account for the leaking. It's more than normal. So I emailed him weekly with updates for 19 months, from January 2014 up until July of 2015.
What happened in July of 2015?
In July of 2015, I issued my final warning. We were set to do a voyage to Seattle. I insisted that we do a dry dock inspection because this leaking, as I've said, is not coming from a place that we're aware of, and we had to do an inspection of the entire ship. If something's on the bottom, below the waterline, that's the only way we were going to catch it, and I'm confident we would catch it. So I said that that's what we needed to do, and again, my concerns were swept aside, probably because I said, 19 months ago that there was no obvious or immediate danger. It still wasn't taken into question, and the cruise was not canceled. There was no dry dock inspection.
Was an inspection scheduled?
Yeah, we scheduled one together. She's my boss. There's nothing I could do at the point that he wouldn't do one beforehand. So we scheduled one, better late than never, I suppose, but I decided to still go on this voyage, even though it was dangerous, because I'm the only person that could do something as the chief engineer, and I figured that's my moral obligation. So hopefully we would make it to Seattle.
Let's move on to what happened on that final voyage.
Sure.
Could you just tell the story?
Yeah. Well, everything was going okay until about 11:40 p.m. The waves started crashing aggressively, and this is putting a lot of pressure on the hull of the ship, which is the bottom part. Most of the hull is under the water. And at 2:20 a.m., the little hole that there was, we know this now, there was rust around that, and there was a hole, a puncture, if you will, in the hole, and it expanded. I guess the aggressiveness of the waves got to it and put pressure on the already compromised puncture, and it ripped into a tear that became 208 feet long. This compromised the bilge pumps, this compromised everything, so much water came in, glass started breaking. It was a really scary time. It took 7 minutes for the crew to identify that there was a serious problem, identify what it was. They informed me, and immediately we started out with calling the Coast Guard. We started sealing up all of the watertight areas. We did, everything we could from that point. Evacuation plan, all of it.
How long did it take for the ship to sink, approximately?
20 minutes from the time we got the news. It would have been about 27 minutes until.
Thank you. Let's talk about the puncture in the hull of the ship. When was it discovered?
It was discovered when the tear happened. There was no way to discover it without a dry dock inspection because it's under the water line, and without bringing it up, I couldn't have seen it.
Okay.
Yeah.
In your professional opinion, how did the puncture rupture into a tear?
Well, the steel that was used to manufacture the ship was compromised. It was faulty. Whoever did that, that's a major issue, but we could tell this had we done a dry dock inspection. We would have been able to tell based on the amount of rust and the amount of time that the ship has been out, because that amount of rust is unusual. So we would have been able to tell that the steel was in some way compromised, because that amount of rust doesn't just accumulate after the amount of time that the Fortuna has been out. So the hull was, it was compromised, and so the tear, it was already weakened. It was already, so that's how we know that that's what caused it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How confident are you that if there had been a dry dock inspection, you would have caught the problem with the steel?
I'm sure.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation. Thank you.
Was there anything in your past experience that would help you identify the problems with the hull? Were you given the chance to inspect it?
Well, I was a hull maintenance technician for over a decade, and I've been working on ships from everything to plumbing, repairs, maintenance, damage control, firefighting, all of it. I have so much practical experience in this field, over 35 cumulative years of experience. I just feel so confident. Had I been able to see that, I would have seen that there was an issue, and I would have been able to identify it. And at the very least we would have done is patched up the hole, or patched up the puncture, which would have at least hopefully gotten us to Seattle. But at most, we would have saved lives.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
All right, Ms. Andrews, thank you so much for being here with us today. Appreciate you taking the time. Just a couple questions for you. I want to start with your experience, and then I want to get into some of your practical experience, how it relates to the events of the Fortuna sinking, and then as well as that, your email correspondences with Mr. Young, if that's okay. Okay, so with your experience, you've worked on boats in the Navy for about 10 years, right?
In the Navy, yes. I worked for 10 years.
Perfect, thank you. And after the military, you went to college?
I did.
Okay. But that was just a community college, is that right?
Academic college, it helps, but for a for a practical profession, what you need is practical experience.
So I'm sorry to cut you off. Is that a yes? Okay, sure, Your Honor.
So yes, that was supplementary to my practical experience. I did get a degree, a bachelor's degree in marine biology,
Okay.
Marine engineering.
And again, that was at a community college, correct?
I don't feel like that's relevant, but it was at a community college.
It's relevant or not, but it's my question. If you would answer yes or no, please.
Yes.
So yes, thank you. Appreciate it. Moving on, talking about your practical experience. Actually, no, I'm sorry, before that. So bachelor's, you did say you had a bachelor's, that's right?
I do.
Okay, not a master's or a PhD, nothing like that?
Not required for the position.
Okay, but you don't have that. Okay, no, thank you. Okay, so part of your practical experience. Would you agree that having more education would be more beneficial here?
Objection, unfairly prejudicial. I'll allow it. You may answer.
Answer? Okay. No, I feel like I've gotten most of my training from hands-on experience. I've learned how to do everything rather than learning just how you would do it if you were there. I've been there. I've done it.
Right. 30 years of experience, right?
More.
Okay. So with that 30 years of experience, would you agree that having more education on top of that would be even more beneficial?
It would be supplementary, but it's not necessary.
Okay, great. Thank you. So with your practical experience, you were the chief engineer for Cruzy,
I was.
for the Fortuna specifically, though?
I managed a fleet of ships.
Right, sorry. Yes, so Fortuna is one of them. And your job was to maintain fleet of ships Cruzy had?
Yeah.
Okay. And for the first 2 years of its existence, the Fortuna ran pretty smoothly, right?
From what I could tell. Yeah.
No issues? Okay. And you started working for Cruzy in 2011, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And the Fortuna had its maiden voyage in 2012, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you've overseen the Fortuna since it's first started operating with Cruzy, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you never once noticed that the Fortuna had any issues with its hull?
I'd never been present for a dry dock inspection.
Right, but when you first bought the ship from Epic Ship Manufacturers, you never noticed anything wrong with the hull?
It had never been used.
Right. And during those 2 years where it was being used, again, there was nothing wrong with the hull that you
Well,
noticed?
The hull was underwater, so I could not have known without a dry dock inspection, so no, I didn't notice
Right.
anything.
And there was no leaking at that time, right?
Not more than the normal amount, not until 2012.
Right. So during those first 2 years, I believe there was no leaking, but during that time, you never noticed anything wrong with the hull or had any indication that the manufacturer had cut corners in its creation, right?
I wouldn't have been able to tell.
Right.
I would have if I had the opportunity, but no.
Perfect. Thank you. So your concerns that you started expressing with Jamie, I want to move on to your emails with him specifically.
Okay.
Your concerns were only with the leaking of the Fortuna, right?
No, it was that the leaking was unexplained, which means it's a symptom of a greater issue.
Right. And in that email, you did say that there was no imminent threat of harm. Is that correct?
I said that in January of 2014, but after weekly emails expressing that it was worsening for 19 months, I hoped that he would get the clue that it was getting worse.
Right. But
Yeah.
you did say that there was no imminent threat of harm.
In January, I said that, yes.
Right. So at any time during your correspondence during those 19 months, you never once said that it was under threat of imminent harm, right?
No, I did, before our
You
final
did?
voyage. Yeah, I said that I specifically requested and almost insisted that we do a dry dock inspection. That only didn't happen because Jamie is my boss.
Right.
He's the CEO.
So you used the words that it was under threat of imminent harm in that last correspondence?
I don't have the email, but if I didn't use those words, I used everything but those words.
Okay, so is it safe to say that you did not say that there was imminent threat of harm? You did have correspondence, that last email, I do want to get to that. But you never once said that there was imminent threat of harm. At best, you implied it.
I mean, it's on Jamie if they didn't pick that up.
That's
After-
not my question.
Okay. I guess perhaps I didn't use those words. I didn't feel like I needed to.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. So, let's just finish with that last correspondence you had with Jamie. So, with that correspondence, you again told him that you felt a dry dock inspection was needed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Jamie protested,
Yes.
and you insisted.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it was you and him, that scheduled the inspection for after its last voyage, right?
I'm not the CEO. My word only goes so far. I did everything I could, and when I was still declined after Cruzy claims that they trust me as their head engineer, and they're not trusting my advice to do this before we leave, what am I to do? So yeah, we scheduled the inspection, better late than never, I suppose.
Great. And right after you scheduled that inspection, you got on the ship and you were part of that voyage, its last voyage, right?
That's my moral obligation.
Great. No further questions.
Regrets? No regrets, Your Honor. You may sit down. Plaintiff, rest their case. Court can call a 5-minute recess. Anyone has to-
Thank you, Your Honor.
I wish I'd said that. I told you that.
You can be my expert witness anytime.
In our cases, especially
We're playing from the
back cross.
Up to programs.
What time did you guys get You're excited?
Such a gift. That's what Adam is to us. This is the resume. Don't underestimate me against us. It's a real threat. It really is. Like, so this is a fair actor. It really is. I can't. Real touch. All about her. I'm trying to just lack of foundation. Lots of examination. Last piece. He was playing prosecutor. So just get nothing. That would be the instant objection. Objection withdrawn. Withdrawn. I'll definitely. I feel like I like it.
Just keep it going.
Or definitely have to like have certain questions that are not leading to back to They're super good. So just like it would be funny learning about totally different.
Right, well, it's like
presiding judge in the second half. So, where you are.
Hello. Okay, shall we start? Starting with the defense. Do you have the witness?
We do, Your Honor.
Witness, call the witness.
Yes, defense calls Dr. Ollie Edwards to the stand.
You are on the oath. Tell us your name and spell it, please.
Ollie Edwards, Ollie Edwards.
You may proceed.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Thanks for coming here today, Dr. Ollie Edwards.
No problem.
Can you tell us a little bit about your qualifications and why you're here today?
Oh, for sure. So I have a bachelor's degree in marine engineering and a master's degree in marine engineering, and also a PhD in marine engineering.
Okay, perfect. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you're here today?
So I've written extensively, actually, on the subject of ship sinking. In fact, I've published 11 publications on the matter, and they all kind of cover extensively what happened here with.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I have in my hand a copy of Dr. Edwards' resume. Permission to approach the bench. Okay. Let the record show I'm tendering a copy of Dr. Ollie's resume to opposing counsel, to the judge and to the witness. Dr. Edwards, what is that?
This is my resume.
And how do you know this?
I wrote it.
Okay. Does this appear to be a fair and accurate copy of your resume? Have you seen it before?
Yes, I have seen it before. I've written it, and it does look to be correct.
Perfect. And does this resume detail your educational experience as well as the publications you've issued?
Yes, it does.
Perfect. Your Honor, at this time, defense moves to admit in evidence what has been pre-marked as Exhibit A as defense's Exhibit A.
No objections.
Perfect. All right. And one more time, would you mind reading your education in chronological order real quick?
Yes. So in April 2010, I received a Bachelor's of Science in Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering from the University of Michigan. I was awarded honors summa cum laude. I also, in 2012, received a master's degree from the same university in the same degree, magna cum laude. And then finally, I received a PhD in the same specialty in December of 2016 from the same university.
Thank you. So in your expert opinion, what happened with the Fortuna? Why did it sink?
Well, it was a unforeseeable, catastrophic event that happened.
Okay.
There was this leak that was going on, and really that's not a clear indicator of a split going down the side of the ship.
Okay. So, based on your expert opinion, do you know why it sank?
Oh, I mean, there was a split down the side of the ship, and that's why it sunk in my opinion.
Okay, great. So how would you characterize a catastrophic hull failure?
Catastrophic, something that's unforeseeable and unprecedented is how I would categorize a catastrophic hull.
Okay. And based on your expert opinion, did Jamie act reasonably in regards to the leaking of the Fortuna?
Oh, totally, Jamie.
Objection.
Why it's relevant? It's relevant because we brought Dr. Edwards here today to speak on Dr. Young's expertise or situation with the Fortuna and if she acted reasonably or not. In regards to it, plaintiffs here are trying to accuse our client of acting negligently and breaching her duty, and we're establishing through expert witness that that is not the case. Thank you. So let me back up for a second. Have you reviewed any other documents in preparation of this case?
Oh, yes. So I reviewed eyewitness testimony of the event, the reports from the Coast Guard after the ship sunk, and I've also reviewed the email correspondence between the CEO of Cruzy and her chief engineer.
Can you tell us a little bit more about those email correspondences?
Well, I mean, there was nothing identified in them as overly concerning beyond a unidentified leak in the hull, in the ship, I should say.
Okay. So based on your reading of those emails and based off the facts you know of this case, did Jamie act reasonably in regards to the leaking of the Fortuna?
Yes, I would say that Jamie acted totally reasonably in regards to the emails that she received.
Okay. Can you tell us about the bilge pumps that were on the Fortuna?
Yeah, so the ship had 16 bilge pumps on it that were collectively rated for about 100,000 gallons per hour in order the ability to dispel water from the ship.
Okay. And did Taylor Andrews tell Jamie Young about those bilge pumps in the emails that you read?
Yes, he did.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit more about the details of the emails that you read between Taylor Andrews and Jamie Young?
Yes, so initially in the emails, Mr. Andrews told Mr. Young about a leak that had been unidentified, but he said that it was of no concern because the leaking was well within the rated capacity of the bilge pumps on the Fortuna.
And what was that rated capacity?
100,000 gallons per hour.
And can you tell us what the amount of water that the Fortuna was taking on at its worst?
At its worst, I believe it was around 20,000 a day. I don't remember that fact. Right.
Okay. Do you remember giving a deposition in preparation of this trial?
I do.
Would it help if I showed you that deposition to refresh your memory?
It would.
Okay.
So at its worst is about 2,000 gallons per day.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Can you tell us about this dry dock inspection that Taylor recommended?
Yeah, so a dry dock inspection, I don't think would have found the issue at hand. I mean, the steel that was used was inferior steel, and that's something that is just unprecedented in the cruise line manufacturing industry. This is something that no one had ever envisioned happening. I mean, there was no regulations about it. There was no legal aspects to this, and so this really isn't something that would be found in a dry dock inspection because it's just something that no one would be looking for.
Okay, thank you. Last question for you. Can you tell us about one of your publications, Do Not Underestimate a Leak, and how it might apply to this case?
So yeah, I mean it's a scary title, but it's meant to attract the eye to it, and honestly, like, leaks should not be underestimated. But there are ways that leaks can be mitigated, such as the use of bilge pumps. And this was all very well known by Mr. Andrews, and this information was given to Jamie, and that was used to inform their ultimate decision to continue to use the ship.
So in your expert opinion, did Jamie underestimate this leak?
No, I would say that Jamie did not underestimate this leak.
And what do you base that opinion on?
I would base that opinion off of my own publications and knowledge of what leaks can do to a ship, and also the emails that he received from his chief engineer, and all of the information that Truzy had up to that point.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Dr. Edwards, I'd like to start by asking you about your publications.
Oh, for sure.
You said that you published 11 works that focus on why ships sink, correct?
That is correct.
And those are the 11 works listed on your resume, correct?
Correct.
So Do Not Underestimate a Leak is about how ships sink, correct?
Well, it's about how they leak, not how they sink.
But your publications are about how ships sink, correct?
That is generally what they talk about. I mean, my very first one is Rethinking the Fundamentals of Marine Engineering. That is definitively not about how ships sink.
Okay. You also published an article called Cruise Ship Industry Standards, Update or Sink, correct?
That would be correct.
Okay. Let's talk about your review of the Fortuna accident. To be clear, you weren't with Cruzy when the Fortuna sank, correct?
That's correct.
And so you've never seen the ship in person, correct?
That's correct.
And you mentioned that the pumps on the Fortuna were rated for 100,000 gallons per hour, but you have also stated that they could pump at most a fraction of that, correct?
That's correct. They're designed to, that rating comes from when they are operating under ideal conditions with ideal circumstances. And so, you know, it is a rather inflated number, but even what I think would be a correct number was still well within reason for the Fortuna.
Let's talk about the dry dock inspection.
Okay.
You believe that an inspector would have caught and patched the puncture in the hull, correct?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's a hole in the ship. Any inspector would be able to see that.
But you doubted that an inspector would be able to see the problem with the steel, correct?
I don't think that they would have tested for inferior steel, that is correct.
Okay. And you're worried about them testing for it because a dry dock inspection is just an ordinary inspection, correct?
I mean, it's not an ordinary inspection. You do have to take the ship out of the water, put it into the dry dock, and inspect it, and that's an unordinary event.
And so that's a pretty intensive inspection, right?
That'd be correct.
Okay. Do you believe you have enough expertise that you would have caught the problem with the steel?
I mean, I am no inspector myself. I know various different indicators of what's going to cause a ship to sink, but, you know, I've never done a ship inspection.
Okay, so that's outside of your expertise.
I would say so, yes.
Okay. And you stated in your deposition, a very experienced engineer certainly would have seen what was happening. Did you not?
I did.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you tell us again about the documents you reviewed for this case?
Yes, I reviewed eyewitness testimony, the Coast Guard reports, and the emails between the CEO and chief engineer.
And again, your expert opinion. Did Jamie act reasonably based off the information she had?
Oh, totally. There was nothing unreasonable about her actions.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
You may speak now. Any other witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Jamie Young to the stand.
Okay. Fortuna. You are on the road. Please spell and tell us your name.
Jamie Young, JamieYoung.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Jamie. I'd like to ask you first a couple quick questions about your role as CEO for Cruzy, and then ask you a few questions about the Fortuna and what you knew about it. What was your main focus as CEO for a cruise line company?
I would say my main focus was safety of the passengers and those on board.
Did you have any other focuses?
Yes, I run a business, so I was concerned. We have employees, we have shareholders, and so I was definitely concerned about being able to pay salaries and make money, among myriad other concerns.
Okay. You mentioned safety. What were some of the specific things you did with passengers to ensure their safety during each cruise?
Yeah, lots of things. So we made sure that the first thing that happened on a cruise was that passengers would go through an evacuation drill after they'd been instructed on the evacuation procedures. There were life jackets on the ship for every passenger, extras if needed, and the other things as well, but those will come to mind.
Okay. And I know we are operating under hindsight a little bit here. In your own words, can you explain what caused the Fortuna to sink?
Well,
Objection, lack of foundation.
Oh,
well, from what I've been told, it seems like it was a catastrophic hull failure that caused the ship to sink.
And how often does something like that happen in your industry?
I've never heard of it happening before. Yeah.
Okay. And where did you acquire such a ship?
We got it from a ship manufacturer in a bankruptcy auction. We had bought ships from them before, and all the other ships had been structurally sound, worked fantastic, some of our best ships. The manufacturer had a great reputation in the industry.
Okay. You mentioned you'd bought ships from them before, but you mentioned that you bought the Fortuna at a bankruptcy auction. What concerns, if any, did this raise about the Fortuna?
None. We had purchased ships from them before, and all of them had worked well, so it didn't raise any concerns for me.
Okay, but what steps did you take, if any, did you do to ensure that the Fortuna was seaworthy?
We put it through all of the required government inspections, of course, as per law, but also I had my own engineers inspect it, pass with flying colors, all the inspections that we did.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask next. How did the Fortuna perform?
Yeah, it passed all inspections we did with flying colors, so no problems at all.
But it sounds like you were made aware of issues with the Fortuna. Can you explain those to me?
Sure. So I was notified of the initial leaking issue. My chief engineer sent an email and mentioning the leak. I was told there was no imminent risk, no imminent danger posed by it. And so my engineer kept me updated on that.
And we're no naval engineers ourselves. You mentioned leaking. How common or uncommon is leaking?
My understanding is it's really common. The ship, it's a huge ship, and so from my experience, it's been common.
Okay. And is the Fortuna equipped to address such issues?
Yes. All ships, cruise ships should have bilge pumps. Ours did. So the pumps are there to address those issues of leaking.
And regarding these leaks, how are you receiving information about them?
Just weekly email correspondence with my chief engineer.
Miss Andrews?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on your correspondence with Miss Andrews?
Yes. So like I said, initially, just the email notifying me of the leak. There was no imminent danger posed by it. And then weekly communication from then on for about a 19-month period is how we communicated about it. Again, I was just told there was no imminent danger from these leaks.
And you mentioned the correspondence was weekly, lasted 18, 19 months. Were you ever made aware of any other issue other than the leaks?
No.
So what was your impression after your correspondence with Ms. Young? I'm sorry, Ms. Andrews.
My impression is there was no imminent danger.
But you were aware of increasing leaks.
Yes.
So what were your plans to address the leaks?
Well, when we started corresponding, I immediately started saving money to eventually prepare for an inspection. So we did that. We also scheduled it for a dry dock inspection to figure out what was going on.
Last question. Based on your experience in the industry and your familiarity with the situation now, who would you say is to blame for the tragedy?
I would have to say the manufacturer of the ship. I just think without the catastrophic hull failure that seems to have been caused by this cut-rate steel, we don't get this event, this tragedy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. No further questions.
Thank you. Is there a question?
Mr. Young, I want to take a moment to talk about your decision in delaying the inspection. You relied on the pumps.
Is there a question?
Yes.
Yes.
And there were 12 pumps?
I don't remember the specific number.
Do you remember giving a deposition under oath?
Yes.
Would it help if I refreshed your memory?
Yes.
Permission to approach the witness.
No objection, Joe.
Fortuna had a dozen bilge pumps rated at 100,000 gallons per hour.
So there were 12 pumps.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the financial relevance as well. Finances were a factor in delaying the inspection, correct?
Yes.
You stated, if you brought your ships in for an expensive and exhaustive inspection, every time something like some unexplained leaking happening, your company would go bankrupt in a month, correct?
Yes, like I said, leaks are super common, and dry dock inspection is expensive. I was weighing what seemed like a minor problem against a major problem of paying our employees and shareholders, etc.
And you bring a ship in if the issue's a major concern?
If it had been a major concern, yes.
And you scheduled to bring the ship in immediately after the final voyage, correct?
Yes, we did schedule to bring it in.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Yes, Joe.
Jamie, in your plans to address the leaks, did you rely on anything other than the bilge pumps?
Well, I consulted my engineer, so I relied on their expertise and what they told me. But I think the bilge pumps were the main thing that I was thinking of to address the leaks.
Perfect. And in fact, let me rephrase. Where do you receive your information regarding the integrity and safety of any of your ships?
From my engineer.
And if Ms. Andrews fails to provide you with specifics, where are you supposed to get that sort of information? No further questions.
Nice. Okay, number two.
Defense rest this time.
Crossing argument. Thank you.
Five red flags. We told you at the beginning of this trial that the evidence would show 5 red flags, 5 warnings that something was amiss and something needed to be done about it. Red flag number 1, the ship was purchased at a bankruptcy sale. We heard from the CEO of Cruzy that the shipbuilders went out of business while they were building the ship. That's implied in the fact that it's a bankruptcy sale. Cruzy himself said, when you run a business, you have to think about financial factors. If you run out of money to build a ship and you need to finish it in order to pay your debts, it's reasonable to infer that there might be problems with it, that corners will be cut. Red flag number 2, unexplained leaking. The chief engineer specified many times, her concern was not with the water leaking in. It was not with the leak itself, but what the leak was a symptom of. You can normally explain where the water is coming from on a cruise ship, but when there's unexplained leaking, it means there's a greater problem that you can't identify, and you need a dry dock inspection. Red flag number 3, the leaking worsened continually for 19 months. The CEO of Cruzy has claimed that he relied on his engineer, but the engineer has said that she pled for dry dock inspections during that entire period. Red flag number 4, reliance on questionable pumps. Just as you wouldn't rely on good parachutes to save you if an airplane had problems, relying on pumps which can pump out water that leaks in is not the way that ships are meant to operate. Also, the expert and Jamie disagreed on the pumping capacity and the number of pumps. They both agreed it was rated for 100,000, but the CEO didn't seem to know that they could only pump in a fraction of that. Additionally, they had different numbers. One thought there was 12 pumps, one thought there was 16. Seems that the person who really knew, the chief engineer, was requesting a dry dock inspection. And that is the red flag number 5. The final request, the insistence that there needed to be an inspection before the final voyage. Only money led the CEO to do otherwise. Now there's some question here about cause. If they had had a dry dock inspection, would that have led to them discovering the issue? Well, their own expert said that while he's not an expert in this, he's certain that an experienced engineer would catch it. And who was coming on that ship to Seattle? An engineer with over 35 years of experience who'd been requesting to have this very inspection. They would have caught it. And if they wouldn't have, some off chance, they would have patched the hole that ruptured. There's no question that if they had gotten a dry dock inspection, the ship would have not gone down the way it did. And if it hadn't, Mr. Starkey would still be whole. He would be able to sleep without visions of Jane and children and himself being swept away into the water. He would still be able to focus, progress in his career.
Objection, Your Honor. Unfairly prejudicial.
I'll allow it.
There is no doubt that he was injured, but you don't have to be proved. You don't have to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. Look to the evidence and ask yourself, do I believe that it's more likely than not that they had a duty to get an inspection? Do I believe it's more likely than not an inspection would have prevented this? Do I believe more likely than not that Mr. Evan Starkey has been damaged? I believe it's a lot more likely than not. Getting a dry dock inspection is a rather ordinary thing to do when there are unexplained problems. And when there are thousands of lives at stake, it is not at all above ordinary to ask you to spend a little bit of money to make sure that things are okay. You don't have to be more than 51% convinced that the ship was going to sink, just that there was a problem and they needed to look into it. That is all that you have to know in order to find for Evan Starkey, and you do know that much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at the start of this trial, we asked you to remember a simple phrase: ordinary, not extraordinary. Opposing counsel wants you to believe that Jamie Young's duty in this situation was an extraordinary one, that she should have been able to predict the future and to know things that her own chief engineer did not know. Jamie's duty in this situation was to act with ordinary care, to act as any one of us would in the same situation. Opposing counsel is talking about these 5 red flags, but they're really 5 yellow flags at best. These 5 red flags, let's go through them. The first one, Jamie Young purchased the Fortuna from a bankruptcy proceeding, and that should have been a red flag, when in reality,
he purchased the Fortuna from a reputable ship manufacturer who had provided several ships in his fleet. Ships that he never had a single problem with up until this point. Second yellow flag. Warning about leaking. Taylor Andrews warned Jamie Young about the leaking that was going on, but in that warning assured Jamie Young that there was no threat or imminent danger. Yellow flag number 3. The leaking increased for 19 months. That's true. Along that time, Taylor Andrews continued to assure Jamie Young that there was no threat of imminent danger, that the bilge pumps could handle what was going on. Yellow flag number 4, questionable pumps. I don't know where they're getting this information from. These pumps were reliable. We heard from testimony today that these pumps were capable of handling the water that was coming on. These pumps were rated at 100,000 gallons of water per hour. We've heard that these pumps, their actual amount that they could pump out was 25,000 gallons of water per hour. And at most, the amount of water that was coming onto the Fortuna was 2,125 gallons of water per hour. A negligible amount, according to experts. Yellow flag number 5, the chief engineer's final warning. I think it's important to note that the chief engineer's final warning was not accompanied with any language suggesting that there was an imminent threat of danger, and that the chief engineer in her final warning scheduled that inspection with Jamie Young for after its final voyage. Jamie Young had no reason to suspect the ship was in danger of imminent harm. Jamie Young ran the Fortuna through every possible governmental, regulatory, and legal check available to her. He ran it through every sea trial, which it aced flawlessly, and even had his own team of engineers look over it, a team of engineers led by Taylor Andrews. And let's talk about this dry dock inspection for a second. This dry dock inspection is not guaranteed to have caught the issue here. We heard testimony from Dr. Ollie Edwards, an expert in his field, who testified that even the most experienced engineer would not have been able to catch this. And we now know from evidence today that that Taylor Andrews is not the most experienced engineer. We ask you today to find the defendant, Jamie Young, not guilty of negligence, because Jamie Young did everything within his power to act reasonably. Jamie Young did everything he could to act as any one of us would in his situation, based off the information he had. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's say something after that.
Sorry, in previous rounds, we weren't given this opportunity. But
If you would like, you guys do.
If I may, Your Honor, I believe you have to specifically request a reservation of time to be able to speak after the defense.
It's okay.
to emphasize a few final points briefly. Opposing counsel has said that Jamie Young did everything he could, but Jamie Young did not do the one thing that his chief engineer asked him to do every single week. He said that Jamie Young never said there was imminent danger, or that Taylor Andrews never said there was imminent danger. But the engineer couldn't know what danger there was without an inspection. That's why he was asking. Jamie Young we're not asked, finding for Evan Starkey does not mean you believe that Jamie Young had a duty to know things that he couldn't have known. He just had a duty to look into it, so his engineers could have known. I respectfully submit that you find for the plaintiff. Thank you.
Okay, Neil, please just give